Hi, everybody. How are you enjoying the conference so far? Everybody having a good time? Yeah, all right. That's the kind of energy I'm coming for. Great. Hi, my name's Josefine. My pronouns are she, her. And in the next couple of minutes, I will be talking about web accessibility and ways in which you can get started with it. So at first, we're going to have a really quick look at what web accessibility is, why you should care about it, and then I'm going to show you some tools to make it a bit more practical that you can use to test maybe for accessibility issues or figure out whether your product or your website maybe is already accessible. So what is web accessibility? Let's dive right in. Web accessibility basically means that the tools that you create, the websites, that these things can be used by people with disability and that they can participate equally on the web. And it's also a basic human right as defined by the United Nations. So they're rooting for it. And if that doesn't convince you that it's a human right, I have a really big number for you. So the World Health Organization, they did a global report on disability, and they found that 15% of our global population experiences some form of disability. And that is 1 billion people. And of course, global data is really hard to measure, and the experience of disability as well. But even if it's just a ballpark, in my opinion, that's a really powerful one if you got 1 billion people affected, right? Even if you're coming at this from a business perspective, I feel like the sheer amount of people and their massive spending power should be a valuable point to consider that maybe accessibility is also something for you. And now, if it's not enough, we got here an overview of some of the many different kinds of user groups that will benefit from web accessibility. So you can see different kinds of disabilities, like physical, auditory, cognitive, visual, or speech disabilities. But you can also see other kinds of impairments, right? So in this table, they're called temporary or situational. So temporary would be maybe you have a broken arm or you lost your glasses. And situational would be maybe you are in a situation where you can't turn up the volume on your phone to watch a video, or maybe you are in bright sunlight. All of these are cases in which web accessibility is going to benefit you. Maybe also like slow internet connection, or you're working on a really small device, or if you ever try to put in the show that you want to watch on Netflix through a remote control to watch it on a smart TV, I mean, that's really tedious, right? So many different user groups, and accessibility is going to benefit all of us, essentially. Now, in practice, what does that look like? It could mean providing enough color contrast, providing different input methods, using the right HTML elements, or explaining unfamiliar terms. Speaking of unfamiliar terms, if you are new to accessibility, maybe there are some things that sound unfamiliar. So for example, we have an abbreviation A11Y, that stands for accessibility. We have the WCAG, so the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. That's really a mouthful. These are kind of rules that you can follow to comply with different levels of accessibility. And you see here the AAA, that's the strictest, the most inclusive one, if you will, but we also have A and AA, which I guess is the most common one that people comply with. All of this is created by the WAI, the Web Accessibility Initiative. So that's just a bit of theory out of the way. And now if I have convinced you now that this is maybe something you should care about as well, where do you start? A really solid point is semantic HTML. Might sound basic, but it's really laying the foundation of all things web accessibility, really. So that could mean not wrapping everything in a div, but really using the elements that for their intended purpose, right? So maybe you want to use an H1 for your most important content. You want to use a navbar. You want to use a button and really distinguish. So when is it a button? When am I using a link? And make sure you're using the correct element, because that's going to provide lots of context for a screen reader, for example. And this is basically what you can do, right? So you use the right elements. You don't necessarily just use CSS and JavaScript to style and make it function the way you want it to, but also use the correct HTML elements. That brings you inherent functionality. You have the default styles, but of course you can overwrite them. And you have already built-in keyboard accessibility. So that comes out of the box, and you don't have to worry about it too much. It's also better for maintaining the code and for SEO because the crawlers, they work a little bit similar to screen readers. So win-win, right? And what you can do in the browser, let me just switch over. So I work for Storyblock, and we're currently trying to improve our own accessibility. So this is by no means perfect, but I wanted to use this to show you what you could do in practice. So let me just open up the DevTools. And of course, so there is, for example, a tool called XDevTools. X is a tool by DQ University, and you can run this as more of a general tool to check your page, for example, and it's going to guide you through all the issues that you have, like an automated test. So I can see here we have 44 issues. Not to panic, this is okay. And then it's going to guide you through all the different things that might be wrong here, right? So, and you can check for these. It's going to, if I open up, for example, this one, it's going to give me some more information, what is up here. I can highlight it, inspect it, find out more, or maybe share this if I want somebody else to fix it. So this is going to walk you through. This is quite useful as a general overview. And then, of course, if you wanted to, you could always go ahead and check if you are using the correct element manually, right? So this looks like my most important content. This is an H1. That's good. If I check, for example, the button here, this is a link with a class button. So this is maybe something we can investigate and then improve in the future so that it provides context for the screen reader. You can also turn off CSS in your browser. I have a tool for this, so I'm going to disable it. And here, this is not pretty, but this is what the screen reader sees essentially, right? So you can check this if it visually conveys the hierarchy and the structure and the page that you want, and that might be useful also to get a general overview of if you're really implementing the correct HTML in the way you want it to. I'm going to turn this back on, and we'll switch back over to my slides. The next issue I want to cover is color contrast, and this is actually one of the most common errors. I think we've just seen like 17 issues with color contrast on our own page, right? So this is something that happens a lot, and it's basically about providing enough contrast between the foreground and the background. And if I say enough, I mean compliant with WCAG AA standard. So this is the middle, this is the 4.5:1, that's the ratio between the background and the foreground. You see, of course, if we have black writing on white background, that's got even more contrast. So the more, the better. And so if I switch over to the browser again, there is a tool to simulate this. So for example, I could simulate total color blindness, and I will see how different people might experience my product or my website. I can also switch this to something like red-green color blindness. I think that's also a very common one. Again, it's visible, but it looks a bit different, right? And I mentioned before, it's not only about disabilities, it's also just common situations we all encounter. It could also be really bright sunlight. And you see here, it's really hard to read. Some things almost disappear. So this is something to consider. Maybe you want people to use your website on their phone, right? And be able to see everything. So this gives you a good first impression of what different experiences look like. Of course, it's not 100% accurate. So there are other tools like this one is a color contrast checker. There are many different ones out there. But what I can do is pick a background color, like this turquoise. And then I'm going to pick a foreground. Let me try if I can get, oh boy, this is so tiny. Did it work? No, it didn't. I'm going to have to pick something bigger. But basically, we're aiming for the white here, right? I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get it. I'm going to pick this way. It's not working at all anymore. Yeah, I'm zooming in. Let's try again. Yeah, That's a good one. Okay, foreground is white. Yes, there we go. Background. Why does... Well, usually this tool works. I'm sure that's the demo gods. If it were to work, you would see that the contrast between the turquoise and the white is actually not enough. I think it's like 2.5-ish. So this is something we have to think about for the future. And then again, you see I picked something really dark and something really light, and that has a score of 17. So that's something really good that I'm also going to be able to see in really bright sunlight, right? So tools like this is really helpful if you want to check if something works out also for different things on your site. Now, and the last topic I want to cover is keyboard accessibility. So that means we want people to be able to navigate our page by different means, not only a trackpad or a mouse, but your keyboard as well. And so it should be possible to reach all the interactive elements with your tab key or your arrows. And I mentioned earlier, if you use semantic HTML, some of our elements already have built-in keyboard functionality, right? And now if people are able to reach it, you also want to be able to move away again. So you don't want to trap your users, which happens quite often in a modal, for example. You want to keep logical tab order, so like the way somebody would read your page, the tab order should be very similar to that. And of course, you want that people know where they are on the page. So you need a visible focus, and it should be possible to know, okay, where am I at? And all the functionality should be available via keyboard. That is also available otherwise. And usually, hover gets, gets lost quite a lot, for example. Sorry, I got distracted there. And so let me see if yes. So what you can, of course, do is I can tab through my page. You see the focus is there on our logo. I tab. We have a visual. I know visually where my focus is. I can go through, and then on the button, if I didn't know I was on the button, I probably wouldn't be able to see it. And then we're here down at the button. On the video, it's kind of cut off a bit, right? So this is something that can be improved, and again, you want enough color contrast there, right? So maybe the turquoise is up for debate. And then another thing you can do, I have a last tool for us. It's called Tab Ally, I think it's pronounced. And this is going to tab through all the interactive elements on my page. It's going to visualize the tab order for us. Yeah, there we go. So we see we're going from top to bottom, from left to right. So this is good. And we can then check, okay, so what are all the elements, and am I reaching everything that I would like to reach? This is quite nice to visualize, right? If you're not missing anything. Yeah, so this is how you could test for keyboard accessibility. That was already all. Thank you guys so much for coming to my talk. And just keep in mind, in the case of accessibility, 10% is already better than nothing, so get started somewhere and continue from there on. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me online or talk to me afterwards, because I'm not sure how I did on time, but I feel like we should get the last speaker some time as well. Yeah. All right. Thank you.